Okay, so now we can begin adding actual layers and things to this project and see them in this viewer here. Before we do that, I'm going to quickly set up my my basic layout for After Effects that I would use a lot. So a lot of these things I don't need, so I'm just going to go close panel. I don't use a tracker a lot. I do use the paragraph and the character panel mainly, so I'm going to keep those there. Libraries, again, I don't really use a ton. You can learn about all of these things. This probably works good for now. So if you do set up the things that you want over here, you can then go and save this layout. So I can go to Window, Workspace, and I can do Save as a new workspace, and you can call this my last name. Hit OK. And so now if I want to, if I open up After Effects and it looks like a default window, I can click on, Watson 2 and it will lay out it'll add these panels over here. So these are all the various things here. Standard is pretty simple. It's nice, and these things are already nice and open, so you can move these around. But this is a really good layout, really just the basic one, at least for what I use. So, and I also put the effects controls panel over to the right sides, or the right side. So originally it's over here, so I would just click and drag this over here, and that's mainly because I use that window a lot. And I want to be able to access the things that are in this window really quickly versus having to go and click on the tab. So if you have a lot of real estate to play with on your screen, then that might be something you want to do. But that just shows you can just click and drag these things and put them really all over the place based on that little purple line. But I just keep mine right there, so it's over here to the side. All right, we got that ready to go. Now let's start adding some stuff. So you can start adding what they call layers inside of After Effects. Before we actually import anything, we'll just show you the layers that you can import or that you can use within After Effects. So you have a couple different things. We have a text layer, so let's do that really quickly. So I can click on the little T up here if I want, or I can hit T on the keyboard or Command T on the keyboard for my text tool, and that brings up this little icon here. So there's a couple ways you can add your text. You can just click once, and that will add this little blinking cursor, and you can type in whatever you want. Okay, so and then this is basically now just a basic text layer. Another thing you can do is I'm just going to click on here and delete that, is I can make a text box. So I can click and drag and make a text box, which technically I prefer to do. It gives me a little more options as far as moving it around, and I can see just where it's contained. I like to be able to see that. So I'm just going to type my name, and then now we can go in and change all of our text settings just like you would in any program, any Word document or anything like that. So what I would do is I'd want to highlight my text, so I'd hit Command A to do that, and then I can go over to that character panel, and if you don't see this, you can go to Window and Character down there and it'll pop up. But for now, I can just change this. We'll just keep this the same font here. So there you can see all the fonts you have installed. You can change the different weights based on what's included for that font. You can change the color. So I can just make this a white. And I'm just clicking on that little white square right there, and I can change the color. And then I can change the kerning, so I can click and pull that blue number back that way. You can change, if you have multiple lines, the spacing between the lines, all kinds of different things here. You can make it bold, you can make it all caps, italicized, all that good stuff is all right here in this character panel. So play around with that. I'm actually going to put mine in the center, so I can go down here to the paragraph tab, and I can click on the center justification option there. And again, this is really basic. This is just like any other program that has text formatting in it. Then I can bump my size up by clicking on the click and drag that 96 number there, make that nice and big. So now that I have the text how I want it, I can just, so now I want to deselect my layer because I don't want to, if I start hitting different keyboard commands, it's going to start typing things in. So I need to deselect this text box, and I'm just going to do that by, I can click on some of these windows over here, or I can maybe I usually just click down this gray section here and it'll deselect it. So there, now we have a text layer inside of our window. So if that was all we wanted to do, we could export that, and that's our project. But now let's talk about some other layers that we want to add. So I'm just going to click on this. Now there's a lot of other things we can do to this text that we'll get into in a little bit, but for now I'm just going to sort of move it out of the way and add more layers and just show you the different types of things you can add to the project for creating your animation. So what you can do is move these around pretty easily if you just click on your red layer. So you can see this is our timeline, and it's added this long red line for our text layer. So we can just click on that, and now I have my text selected. But the problem is, if I want to move this around, I gotta get a different tool, because right now my text cursor or my text tool is selected. So if I try to click and move it, That's not going to work. I'm just going to make another layer, and I don't want to do that. So what you need to do is really begin to understand how to use your different tools. So this is the text tool. We don't want that. We want to get a pointer tool or a selection tool to be able to move this around. So the quickest way to do that is just by hitting V on the keyboard, and that'll give you your selection tool. Or you can click on this little arrow up here, and that'll give you the same one. But now I can click this and I can move this wherever I want. So I'm just gonna we'll just put it over here for now. Okay, so that's our text layer. Now let's talk about shape layers. So shape layers would be circles and squares and all that good stuff. And there's tons of ways you can use them, but you can go up to this little square that's right here, and this is where it says this rectangle tool, and you can click and hold that, and it'll give you a couple of other options. You can go to the circle or a rounded rectangle, things like this, a star tool, even do a multi-sided polygon. But for now, let's just draw a square. So I'm gonna click on the rectangle, and now I can draw a simple square. I can just let that go. So this is now saying, cool, like I made a square. So I have this kind of pink square right here. So we have a couple of options for our square. We can go and change the fill and also the stroke. So if I were to go up here right now and adjust some of these things, they're not going to change anything. You do want to make sure that you select the layer that you want to adjust. So I need to click on our shape layer that it added down here, and you can see that it's selected with these this little blue bounding box. So now I can adjust the stroke size, which is what we have selected right now. I can bump that up, and I can go to I can click on this little pink box here and change the color, hit OK, and I can also add a fill to it. So right now there's nothing in here. It's not a black fill, it's just there's nothing here. So I want to add a color there, so I can click on the fill button and change this to whatever color I want. Then you can click on actually the fill word, and you can add maybe a gradient or something like that. I don't use that all that often. You can click on the stroke and do the same thing there, and you can also change the stroke size, which we talked about. Okay, so that is a shape layer. Again, you can go through and you can add you can do a rounded rectangle or a ellipse tool, which is just a circle. So I can click and drag like that. I can hold down shift and it gives me a nice perfect circle right there. Again, I don't want that. I want just a solid color in that fill there. Okay, so again, if I wanted to move this around, I don't want to click and try to drag it because I have my shape layer selected, or my shape tool selected there. I will need to hit V on the keyboard to get that move tool again and be able to move that around. Okay, so that is a shape layer, and let's talk about a couple of other things. So I'm going to click off down here, and I'm going to go up to the layer panel, this layer menu, and right here we can go to new, and I can go to, so we talked about text and we talked about the shape layer, and we can also add a solid. So a solid is going to be a little bit different than a shape layer in the fact that it doesn't have quite the same properties that a shape layer would have, and we'll get into that in a bit, but I can just add a solid, and that's going to give me just a background layer. So I'll click on solid. It's pretty much asking you the same thing you asked earlier when we made a composition. I want this to be the same size of my composition, so 1920 by 1080. You could do 500 by 500 or whatever you want to do, and then you can change the color. So we'll just do something like a bright pink. Hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK here, and it fills my screen with this solid layer. So this is where you'd want to add maybe a background. So now you can begin moving your layers around to figure out how you want this to be organized. Obviously all of our things that we've already made are gone, so I need to move the solid that I just made to the bottom. So again, you want to treat this just like you would like a Photoshop layer panel. So whatever's on the bottom is going to be on the bottom that you see, and so forth. So I'm going to click on the layer here, this magenta solid, and I'm just going to drag it down to the bottom, and boom. So now we have our setup. It's just like we're making something in Photoshop. The only thing is we can really do a lot of animation inside of After Effects. So now we have our layer set up. So the same thing goes here. If I were to move this over here, and then I want to move my name here, it's on the bottom, so I'm just going to move my shape layer down to the bottom, and boom, now we have this hideous looking design, and it's ready to go. I actually can't stand to look at this, so I'm just going to change the colors really quick because this is going to make me blind. So I'm just going to do something a little more muted to there we go. That's a little bit better. So let's talk about a couple more layers that we can add. So I'm going to go back to my layer menu, go to new, go over here. So we've covered the text, we've covered solid. We've covered the shape layer. So let's talk about an adjustment layer. So I'm going to click on this, and if you're familiar with Photoshop at all, you know that you can add adjustment layers to change colors or things like that. So this is just like an effects layer. So there's nothing on this layer. It's completely empty, but if I begin adding some effects to it, then it will affect everything that is under it. So for instance, I'm going to go to, we'll go through this menu some more in a bit, but I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to go to Color Correction and do black and white. So now I have, you can see that I added this black and white panel here on my effects controls, and it is on this adjustment layer down here. So if I were to click on like my name, obviously there's no effects on my name, so there's nothing going to be here. But if I click on the adjustment layer, now I'm going to see the effects that I've added, and it's made everything below it black and white. So if I were to move this adjustment layer down, it will make, actually, well, my name is still actually white, but if I move it maybe to the bottom here, it's going to make that background black and white, and everything above it is not affected. Really, wherever you put that, it will adjust everything. It will affect everything below it. So you could do blur, you could do some distortion on that, you can do all kinds of stuff, but this is how you would use an adjustment layer. Okay, so let's go up to a layer one more time, go to New, and you have a null object, and this is going to sound technical and complicated. We'll get into this in a little bit, but really this is just a fake layer, an empty fake layer. It's not really going to serve as an adjustment layer where this is going to apply effects to it, but this is great for using this as like a controller. So if I had a bunch of layers and I wanted to scale them up and scale them down all together, I would basically connect them to my null object and be able to move them around and scale them up all together. We'll get into that again in a little bit. I don't want to go through that too much right now, but that's what we're going to be using the null object for. What's also cool is you can go in and then change the name of these. So if I wanted to change this just to black and white, I would click on the adjustment layer, hit enter on the keyboard, and then call this black and white. Same thing with the null, as I can click on that and say, controller or something like that. And then it just keeps me a little bit organized. You can also go in and change the color. So if I want all of my text layers to be red and everything else to be a different color, I can click on this little colored square here and change that to something different. So the last thing we'll cover in this video is adding an image or some textures or any kind of file that you want to your project. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click inside of this project manager window, and I'm going to hit Control I or Command I, or you can go to File and Import and then click on Files. So in here I can start adding in maybe some different textures or something. So let's say I'm going to add maybe a textured background or something like that. So I'm going to find the files that I've saved, and I do recommend that if you're building a project that's going to contain different layers, you want to make sure you keep all those in one folder. You don't want to have those spread out all across your computer. Try to keep everything in a central location for your project. So for me, I like to make, if I'm working on a project like this here, I want to make a folder where I'm keeping all of my textures and things. I'm keeping my After Effects project. I'm keeping my Photoshop file, all that together inside of this project. So that'll just help it if you open it up later on, then you have files everywhere, you're on a different computer, then all of your files are still together if you have that same hard drive and all of your project files. So I'm going to import just a texture of some sort. So I'm just going to click on this paper background here, and it's going to drop it in right up here. So if you've noticed up here in the project manager window, it's going to start showing a couple different things. So we have the files that we've imported. We have our main comp that we've created. You can see too that it's added the solids folder, and After Effects will create that automatically as soon as you begin adding things like this, solid layers here or adjustment layers. It'll put them all in this folder. You don't really have to worry about that. It's just going to keep them all inside there. I really ever reference this folder, but it's there if you need it. Okay, so before we go too crazy, I would always suggest to begin organizing your project manager, because as you add files, things will get a little hectic. So for now, I'm just going to click on this little folder icon, and I can make a new folder. I'm just going to call this assets here. And so anything that I import, I'll just throw into my assets folder, just so I have it all in one central location. So how do we import that? How do we drag it to our file? And that's all we really need to do is I'm going to go back in here, find my image, and then I'm going to click and drag it down to my timeline. Obviously this layer doesn't show up because we've put it below everything that we've already added. So in order to see that layer, we'd have to drag it up to somewhere higher in this layer panel. So I'm just going to click and drag it maybe up here right under that shape layer, and boom, now we can kind of see that coming through. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the black and white adjustment layer we have, and you can see now that there's color on that image and it's good to go. All right, so we're going to stop it right here and we'll pick up everything else in the next video. I don't want to go in too much detail about how to change the size and rotate it and all that good stuff quite yet. So hopefully you've been able to follow along so far. And in the next video, we'll talk about how to move things around and maybe clean this up a little bit.